So hi everyone, my name is Beth Hoskins and I am the Business Development Manager at Ringgold. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Ringgold's data, the services we provide, and a few of our use cases that the data serves. So just a little bit of quick housekeeping before we get started. We encourage you to ask questions, but we would like to keep everyone muted through the presentation just to prevent background noise. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat and my colleague Jean Brodall will collect them and then we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We are also going to be recording this demonstration, but we will cut out the question portion of the demonstration. So feel free to ask whatever you want and it will stay in this room. All right. Oops, sorry. All right, so before we start talking about Ringgold's data, I just wanted to talk just a little bit about Ringgold, the company. So Ringgold is a small for-profit multinational company with around 25 staff. The staff are based in both the US and the UK. And we also work with over 40 contracted researchers throughout the world that cover the records in their territories. So this really helps us make a database that is well informed. Between our staff and our contractors, we have over 40 languages represented. Again, kind of serving the purpose of maintaining this global database of organizations. We really need to, understand those territories and languages so that we can translate that information into a structured data set. So Ringgold has been curating organizational data for over 15 years now. That's really what we do. Today we'll be focusing on our Identify database, which is our flagship product, but it's really kind of the center of what Ringgold does, and all of our other services and products are kind of built on the Identify database. Our clients include scholarly publishers, technology providers, funders. We even work with some universities now. So a lot of the companies that we work with, touch the scholarly communication space in some way. So we started out working mostly with scholarly publishers, but over the past 5 to 10 years, we've really moved forward to start working with submission vendors, companies like Copyright Clearance, CCC RightsLink, and other companies that kind of provide services to publishers and organizations that publishers serve. So just a quick glance at our client list. I'm sure you recognize some of these names. Perhaps you even work for them. And if you want to take a deeper look, feel free to go to our corporate website. All right, so what is the Identify database? Really, when we talk about Ringgold data, we're really talking about the data that's in the Identify database. The Identify database is a data set of all of the organizations that Ringgold has ever assigned a Ringgold ID to. So currently, that's just over 500,000 organizations total, or active organization records. And these organizations are all sectors, all regions, and really what they have in common is that they touch the scholarly communications space in some way. So, how we make records that are added to the database is through our work with our clients. So, as new organizations license content or authors are submitting content from those organizations, that is how the database grows. So currently it grows at around 5% per year. And we also, maintain all of the records that are in the database on top of that. So for each record in the Identify database, we structure metadata around those records. We put them in organizational hierarchies, and we also collect relationships between consortia and organization members. So that's not just licensing consortia, but all types of consortia. So not just the consortia that we sell to, as if you're with a publisher, but also consortia that do research activity in groups and so forth. So today we'll be looking at the identified data via Ringgold's online interface. So it's just one of the access methods to the data. We also provide REST API calls, and we also provide a copy of the database for local loading that we update each week in several formats. So, really, the Identify database really is a data set that just can be accessed in many different ways. And most of our clients, especially those who do deep implementations, use a combination of access methods to support their use cases. So for each organization in the Identify database, there are really three major components to the record. There is the Ringgold ID, which is the persistent identifier that we have assigned to each organization. And we also, structure the organizations in their organizational hierarchies. So as you can see, we don't just create a record and ID for that main organization, but also departments underneath. So it's quite granular. Each of these records would have their own Ringgold identifier, their own metadata collected around it, and then they would just be in their hierarchy. So they would have relationships to other organization records in that same hierarchy. And then, the structured metadata that we add for each record is also the other component of the database. Again, we structure metadata around every organization record that we add. So that data may be specific to, a university, corporation, or even a university's department or institutes. All right, so how organizational identifiers are utilized. So when I'm talking about organizational identifiers, I am really speaking to persistent identifiers, and in our case, that would be the Ringgold ID. So this is a unique numeric value that's assigned to the organization and is never reused. So if an organization were to cease, that would be removed and never granted to another organization. So the point is, to keep those persistent to really help your data quality. So there are really a few ways that organizational identifiers can be used in practice. So one would be to disambiguate the information that you have. So by having an organizational identifier connected to your records, you would be able to easily see the difference between Northeastern University in the United States and the Northeastern University in China. It's also a way to consolidate your records. So there are often cases where you may need to keep multiple accounts for the same organization for various reasons. By having an organizational identifier assigned to those records, you still have a really easy way to pull all of the activity from those various accounts together and, for instance, look at what the University of Northampton's activities are, even if that organization has a few different accounts. So similarly, there may be cases where your needs are a little more robust than that, and you're not just looking for all of the activity at one level of an organization. By having the organizational identifiers attached to your records and then using the Identify database hierarchies, this allows you to also see relationships between the organizations. So for instance, if you had done a system-wide deal, like a site license deal with the Oregon University system, and then you also had an author who had submitted an article and they were affiliated with Portland State University's School of Social Work, using the relationships and organizational identifiers in the database, you would be able to see all of that activity together. So it allows you to kind of see that 360-degree view of an organization. So you could look top down at any organization and see even activities, that are connected to departments or institutes that are underneath that organization. So there are really three key use cases that the Ringgold data serves. So obviously, these use cases are applied to a very wide assortment of business needs and activities, but we really see kind of the way that the data is used in practice fit into three categories. So the first being that our data is often, or the Identify database is often used as an authority file of organizations. So by having one, big centralized source of data about organizations, and you have, all of those organizations disambiguated, it allows you to avoid free text entry whenever you can. So instead of having, maybe you have a web form where your members are coming in, and part of that filling out that web form is to enter their member affiliation or their affiliation to an organization. Instead of having that be a free text field, you could utilize the identify database in a dropdown, so that right there you're already, collecting that structured information, and you can very quickly action that connected to other accounts that you have for that same organization. So our data is also used very prominently in data governance initiatives and ongoing tasks related to data governance. So I think one of the very powerful ways that the data set can be used is to join data between systems, so that you can have processes flowing between systems, or you can, just very easily integrate data from multiple systems. So, I think most of us, especially those of us who work at larger companies, are working with many internal systems, such as maybe your submission system, your CRM, your fulfillment system. So by kind of speaking a common language of organizations, you can very easily bring that data together and look at all of the activity of your organizational constituents. So we have some clients that actually have processes that flow between their systems using persistent IDs and hierarchies. And then we have other clients that actually just bring all of the data into a data warehouse or a reporting program and use the persistent IDs and the hierarchies to, report on all of the data in mass. So I think that, we have separate systems for many different reasons, but I know that in my background, there were many times where even in sales, I wanted to know, what are all the submissions from this, institution that I'm renegotiating a license with, or so I think there are many areas where business units need to work together around organizations, and speaking one language about organizations, especially using persistent identifiers, can really make that work much easier and much more efficient. And then the last business use case that we see our data used for is business development. So prospecting, marketing analysis, and sales type activities. So really, because we've done the work to collect all of these organizations in a database using structured metadata, that allows our clients to kind of see the profile of their own customers and then go out and look for other organizations that fit a similar profile. So if you notice that one of your products sells mostly to four-year schools that have certain subject areas that they offer courses in, you could look for other organizations that fit that same criteria in other markets, or even your same market that you just haven't targeted previously. We also see our data used to support kind of assessing the market for new products and also looking at new revenue models. So I think, anytime you have structured data that's enriching the data that you have about organizations, it really gives you a lot more tools to work with when you are considering, moving to a new revenue model or launching a new product in a new subject area. All right, so I'm just going to hop over to our online interface to actually look at some of the data together. So let me just pull this over. All right. So I'm not going to exhaust you going through every piece of metadata that is on this page, because we collect quite a bit of metadata, especially about academic organizations, but we will follow up with some information, and you are welcome to come to us for more information. We would love to sit down and answer more questions, go through more of the metadata. So we're looking here at the University of South Africa's record. So they are a top level university, or that's what kind of the main university. But if we click here and look at their hierarchy, you can see that we don't just have a record for University of South Africa, we also have records for all of these departments as well. And the metadata that we're going to look at connected to University of South Africa is also collected specific to each level of this hierarchy. So we collect some basic geographic metadata about all of the organizations in the database. Two very useful pieces of metadata that we collect are the URLs and the alternate names. So in this case, University of South Africa has only had one domain, but we would also collect any retired domains. So if you have information that would allow you maybe to see their relationship to organizations, assuming they used their organization's domain or their work email address. So that's definitely a use case that we see our clients using the URLs for, or the domain information. We also collect alternate names. So in any case where there is a organization whose name is in native language, so not English, we always translate that into English. And we actually have a full taxonomy dedicated to the alternate names. You can see that University of South Africa is also known by a few other names. So this really demonstrates, I guess, the power of persistent identifiers. If you were to leverage this data set in one of your systems, regardless of whether the user entered UNISA or University of South Africa or one of these other names, it would always connect to the same Ringgold ID. So, it just serves the purpose of kind of, I guess, speaking to how different people identify the same organization, but behind the scenes, collecting that persistent identifier that allows you to bring it all together very easily and not duplicate accounts. In the case of University of South Africa, there are some merged organizations of the past. So in any case where an organization merges or is acquired, we would collect that and keep it in the alternate names. Obviously, if this happened in 2004, this is very unlikely, but this also allows a user to look up an organization by the old name if they don't realize it's changed, and very easily find the new name for the organization. So we also collect some additional metadata about academic organizations, speaking to their mission, their governance model, their economic models. And we also collect subjects that academic organizations offer courses in. So I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment because it's a very common prospecting tool. But before I get there, I did want to point out there are two pieces of identified database metadata that are used very heavily to profile our clients' customers and also to prospect, and they are the Ringgold type and the Ringgold tier. So these are two metadata fields that we have designed the taxonomies for so that we could apply them globally to all records. So we do collect some other tiering systems, for example, Carnegie classifications, but anyone who works with those classifications realizes that it is restricted to only US academic organizations. These Ringgold tiers and Ringgold types extend across the full database so that you could look at organizations, in different areas using the same set of rules. So the Ringgold types are specific to the sector and the specialty of the organization. In this case, for the University of South Africa, it's just academic because they're, again, that kind of top level organization. If we were to look at their departments underneath, and you may have noticed this in the hierarchy, the departments will be academic / and then the specialty of the department. So the Ringgold types are used very widely, especially in other areas like corporations where we haven't collected, for instance, subjects because that's specific to academic organizations. So for a corporation, the Ringgold type would tell you what the specialty of that corporation was. And same for other types of organizations, like this is how you would look at for museums or religious organizations. By religious organizations, I just mean like seminaries and churches. Ringgold tiers are a tiering system that speak to the sector, size, and reach of the organization. So University of South Africa is an A4, which means they're a high research academic organization. And A3 would be a 4-year, and A2 would be a 2-year, technical college, community college. Well, actually not necessarily 2-year, but, fit that same profile of what we in the United States would consider a community college. So, using something like the Ringgold tier, you could go into the search here and you could actually look for the equivalent of a community college in China. So even when in other territories they might go by other names, using the Ringgold tiers and types can help you kind of cast a wide net, since we've structured this taxonomy and assigned the metadata ourselves. We also collect size metrics for organizations. It's important to note that for something like size metrics, we require that the organization self-reports this on their website. So in the case of an academic organization, their size is typically going to be their enrollment count. In this case, we also were able to find a staff count. As you go into other records that are in other sectors, there's kind of different size metrics. So for example, if you were to look at a hospital, you might see the number of beds. If you were to look at a public library systems record, you would likely see the number of public libraries in the system. So that size metric really changes as you go through the sectors, kind of specific to especially how pricing for those sectors might be approached. Because a lot of the metadata that we collect and we store is really to obviously serve the needs of our clients. So our clients are, often selling into, for instance, a hospital and kind of evaluating the hospital size using the number of beds. So anyways, many different size metrics depending on sector. But in order for it to be included, it has to be reported on the organization's public website. So I mentioned subjects. For academic organizations, we collect subjects that they offer courses in. This is a very powerful prospecting tool for many of our clients, especially those who are publishing or offering resources in more niche or specialized subject areas. As you can see, University of South Africa doesn't have subjects directly connected to their record, but instead they are inferred from the hierarchy underneath. So this really speaks to the granularity of the database. These subjects are coming up from the particular departments where they're offered. So if we wanted to know where at the University of South Africa is this course in agriculture and food offered, or courses, we could jump over and see this relationship, and then we would learn that that subject is offered at University of South Africa's College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences. So not only do you have the subjects connected to that main top level organization, but you also can find exactly which departments offer them. I don't think I've talked much about what is called here external metadata, but I should say that we map the Identify database to other open data sets that are leveraged by our clients to ensure interoperability. So we're actually an ISNI registration agent. ISNI is just an open bridge identifier. So there's not extra metadata in ISNI's data set, but ISNI is referenced in other open data sets. So every time we create a new record in the Identify database, we also add an ISNI ID. Since we are a registration agent, we can ensure full coverage there. We also map our data to the Open Funder Registry, or now called Funder Registry. So any organization in the database that provides funding and has a Funder Registry ID, we have included that Funder Registry ID in the database, just again as a crosswalk to other data sets. So in this case, you could, for instance, go to Crossref's data set and you could look at the articles that University of South Africa has funded using this Open Funder Registry ID. So there's a few others that are regional. So we also include the IPEDS ID for US institutions. And we also include some other external metadata, meaning tiers that we bring in from other systems. So I know I've mentioned Carnegie classifications. We bring those in for US institutions. We also bring in the JISC bands for UK academic institutions. And then just as a last note, I mentioned that we create relationships between consortia and organization members. So you can see here the consortia that the University of South Africa is a part of. And similarly, if you were to go onto a consortium's record, you would see their member list. If anyone on this call works in licensing, I'm sure you recognize SANLIC, and chances are these other three consortia are performing different types of activities. So, just like there's a Ringgold type applied to the University of South Africa, there's also Ringgold types applied to consortia, which is how you would be able to see that SANLIC, for example, is Ringgold type consortium/licensing, which is reserved for any consortia that actually purchases content on behalf of organization members. So you could isolate just those if that was the only scope that you wanted to look at. So in our online interface, we have an advanced search area where you can search by any combination of the metadata that we just looked at. Obviously, if you access this database in other ways, you can do the same thing just differently. We've just kind of made it really quick and easy here. So I just wanted to kind of demonstrate how our clients who use the Identify database for business development purposes might use the advanced search. So as I mentioned, many of our clients use the subjects heavily. So a common search that we see, again, for our clients who are prospecting to academic organizations, which is a very common market for our clients. They will often choose the combination of a Ringgold tier and a subject. So let's say we wanted to look for high research organizations, or specifically academic organizations that had programs in computer science. So as you can see, our subjects get quite granular. In this case, I will just include all of computer science and the sub-subjects. And then no need to worry about this too much, but I'm just going to select a level. We assign levels to kind of the level of this record in the hierarchy, and level 0 just means it's the main organization instead of the departments. So this is a really common search to just look for, what are all of those universities that are high research, have this subject, and then, often our clients might also combine this with a particular country, but I'm just going to run the search as is. So over here on the left, it kind of summarizes the number of organizations in different regions. So as you can see, we have 3,481, main universities that are high research and have courses offered in computer science. So just to go back to search, just one more time very quickly, I did want to just pull down the Ringgold types just to give you an idea of how that works, just because we did really focus on academic records, and I just want to make sure that it's clear that this database does span all sectors. So even though we collect more metadata specific to academic organizations, for instance, the subjects, we also have records for corporations and public organizations, hospitals, etc. So I know I had mentioned that you could isolate consortia that are licensing consortia. So you would use Ringgold types for that. But you would also use Ringgold types to look at particular types of corporations. So if I wanted to only see, corporations that are focused in the area of biotechnology, I could choose this particular Ringgold type. And then, I would be looking at those corporations. Now, obviously, this is not every corporation in the world. I mean, one thing that's kind of nice about our database is that these are specifically the corporations that we've needed to add records for to serve the scholarly communications market. So it's kind of limited, I guess, to those corporations that either license content or maybe have a staff member who is submitting. They have to have some kind of interaction with our industry, or the chances that their record probably wouldn't have been created, because that is how new records get added to the database. So that is a really quick breeze through of what's in the Identify database, but obviously there is much more to say. Depending on what your use case is and how you work with organizations, this could all look very different in terms of how we would be using this data. So before we get to questions, I just wanted to very quickly just talk about the Identify database terms and pricing. Anytime you license the Identify database, your license is unlimited. So you can use any combination of the access methods that we have available in any number of systems. Actually, we really want you to use the data set anywhere that you're working with organizations, because I think that the kind of the power of using something like the Identify database really grows as you are leveraging it in different places within your business. So pricing is tiered based on annual turnover, and then the metrics really change depending on whether you're a publisher or an intermediary. We'd be happy to talk to you more about that if you're interested. And then Ringgold offers some related services. So our audit service is where we're actually mapping your data to the Identify database and then returning, a map of your account IDs to the Ringgold IDs and then all the metadata to you. We have another service called Validate that's a good bolt-on to the Identify database because it allows you to create new records on the spot. So for any deep implementation where you might have a record that doesn't already exist in the database, this would be a way to kind of keep that automated process going. And then we also have a separate product called the Consortium Directory Online, and it takes those licensing consortia, there's around 500 of them, and it does a deep dive on their policies and their contacts. So that's just kind of it goes beyond the information in the Identify database and really more into the model licenses and all of that. So if you do work with consortia, it's a good resource for finding efficiencies in terms of knowing who requires counter 5 compliance, things like that.